It's fall, y'all. I'm Alex.
And I'm Dani.
And we're seriously nerdy about Japan.
But you didn't see that coming.
Usually we have like a good banter about something that's specific to the topic.
2023 was a big year for us because we got married. And when you get married, you get to go on honeymoons. And sometimes those honeymoons are in Japan.
We went to Osaka and Kyoto and Tokyo.
And we thought maybe there's a way for us to turn all of those locations into one teeny tiny build. Some of our favorite things we did were look for crafts and miniatures in Tokyo. We found really cool speakeasies. We fell in love with gachapon. And we decided to wrap all of this up in a big bow with the Nara Deer Park, which is a sacred deer park just outside of Osaka. So you can go and feed and bow to deer and you can interact with them.
And they eat crackers from your hands. And boy howdy.
There's something really fun about going on vacation, buying objects that you can take home and then make something out of, and then that object can live on, and getting to sort of relive all the memories of our trip.
Objects of memories.
Hope you're ready for teeny tiny deer.
To kick things off, we found this handsome Torii Gate model in the bottom floor of a 7-story model train store in Akihabara district in Tokyo. While we were in Kyoto, we visited the Fushimi Inari Shrine, which consists of thousands of Torii gates going up a path. So we wanted to find a way to pay tribute to that in this diorama, and a Torii gate felt like the perfect thing to use. Setting the Torii gate aside to dry, it was time to take stock of our treasures. We have a fruit market, a display case to put the fruit market in, some deer, which were also an N-gauge scale, like the fruit market, and some more deer. Our idea was to use the fruit market as the centerpiece of our build, and then to model various parts of it, like different locations we wanted to remember from our trip to Japan. The first step is always disassembling everything so that we can have a good sense of what we're working with and make sure we can repaint everything to the level that we want to. One of the key concepts we wanted to base our build around was our visit to Nara and the multitude of deer that inhabit that deer park.
It's true. Nobody gets to keep their horns in the Nara Deer Park. They boop too much. A lot of head booping.
With all our teeny tiny components in place, it was time to get to base coating. So we busted out the handy dandy airbrush and coated the deer, the building, and the Torii gate in a base coat of black primer. Once those components had dried, we started color blocking sections of the building to match the various inspirations that we had taken from our trip. I ended up painting the deer by hand, but in retrospect, there really wasn't any reason why I couldn't have just done it with an airbrush. Lessons learned. With all the color blocking on the building dried, it was time to start applying some washes. It's always uniquely gratifying to see how much contrast you can bring out of something once you apply a wash. Easily the most tedious and repetitive part of this entire process was painting all of the detail onto these individual beams.
Our color palette for the exterior was actually inspired by our time in Kyoto, which has this beautiful blend of traditional and modern architecture. So the back of the structure is more of those neutral colors you'd see in traditional architecture, and the front is this more modern gray and cooler colors. While Alex was busy on the exterior, I turned my attention to the interior, figuring out how to make tiny capsule toy machines known as gachapon. I decided to cast them in clear UV resin with tiny microbeads that are typically used for manicures, representing the little cylinder toy capsules. The toys themselves are typically contained inside plastic rounds that have a colorful lid and a transparent bottom portion. So by painting just a little bit of the glass beads and then casting them inside the UV resin, it looked like you had a clear container full of gachapon. I was able to easily remove the original platform that came in the downstairs shop and replace it with a platform that I had built in Tinkercad and 3D printed of my own. This is all the bases for the gachapon. So these bases with the UV resin cubes meant that I had something looking sort of like teeny tiny gachapon machines. One of the things I am apparently seriously nerdy about is making trees that look realistic. In shopping around online and in craft stores, I just couldn't find tiny trees this scale that looked realistic. They looked kind of plasticky or not quite in season in Japan in January, so I ended up watching a lot of YouTube videos and assembling my own. To do this, you essentially take tiny twigs and glue them forever until you hate trees and nature in general. But after that, you glue on foliage until you hate trees and nature in general. And then after that, you glue on more foliage until you hate trees and nature in general. All joking aside, this was a really fun process. It takes a lot of steps, but honestly, most of the time is just spent letting the glue dry. And the end result is way better than anything that I could find in a craft store and are very cute, very seasonally and regionally appropriate trees that were sort of charming. And the good news is I made more than I needed, so I have more for the next project. Alex and I visited Japan in January, so it wasn't full-on blizzard mode, but there were a few days that we got a little sprinkling of snow, and we wanted to bring that to life in this tiny miniature build. So with a little bit of glass crystal glitter and snow terrain sprinkled over the top, we were able to give that friendly, wintry, but not full-on snowstorm look to these little trees. This teeny tiny scale is definitely new to us, and one of the things we repeatedly learned along the way is the importance of pushing shadows and contrast so that these read as the correct scale. Unfortunately, it's one of those things where you can't just paint it the color that it would be in real life and call it done. It'll just look too flat. So we had to repeatedly go back with washes and shades just to give the level of dimension that we were looking for. So you'll see us go back a lot with just a little bit more color and contrast to help bring these to life at the appropriate scale. Now you won't really be able to see in the finished build because they'll be locked behind windows, but on the interiors we did want to pay tribute to some of our favorite things we did in Japan. So this is a tribute to Bar Jeremiah in Tokyo that has a beautiful antique interior, and the upstairs is a tribute to Bar Nayuta in Osaka, which is a lovely speakeasy tucked away on the 5th floor of a very cool building. You won't really notice these details, but it meant a lot to us that they were tucked inside and great reminders of the memories we made.
If you're curious why Dani and I are so obsessed with gachapon, we genuinely spent a good amount of time walking through these gachapon shops looking at the various toys that you can get out of these vending machines. You could get garden hoses or tiny appliances, really anything your imagination could conjure up. There was probably a gachapon of it. In fact, we ended up buying an extra duffel bag on our way home and bringing about 30 to 50 gachapon that we had bought back with us to the States when we returned home.
If you've watched any of our previous videos, you know that we are novices to the world of miniature electrical wiring, but we're not letting that stop us, and you shouldn't let it stop you. So for this particular build, we used a very simple coin battery pack and wired that with some micro LEDs just up through the base of the display and the building, and then put them in the interior to cast a very subtle glow. For the exterior terrain, we turned to one of our new favorite materials, which is epoxy sculpt. It works a lot like clay, but it doesn't require to be dried, and it has two-part epoxy properties, which means it's going to help the building base stay stuck to the display base, and we can push in elements like planters or like the torii gate right into the surface, and after it dries, those elements will be stuck in and not moving. I'm a big fan of epoxy sculpt. With all the gachapon elements dry, it's time to assemble. And if we're breaking out the glue with the skull and crossbones on it, you know it's going to be good. So at this point, it was only a matter of taking the tiny UV resin cubes that are filled with the gachapon capsules and fitting them into their 3D printed bases. Now, it wasn't a perfect fit, but it's pretty convincing, and with an extra layer of polyurethane gloss, it gave them sort of that bubbly, plasticky look that I think in the interior of the building is passable.
This last upstairs interior that you won't be able to particularly see through the windows is to commemorate our Airbnb in Osaka, which had this incredible anime-style mural painted on the ceiling.
These interiors will barely be visible, but we loved the idea that we'd sort of captured the essence of some of our favorite places in Japan. So very quick, very sloppy, using existing epoxy sculpt we had left over and a quick coat of paint. Should you peek through the windows, you can sort of see that there's furniture and a story happening inside. Also, Gimlet was a big fan. I don't know. I'm just gonna own this one so somebody in the comments doesn't, but I took all this time to make these tiny interiors and then I put up screens to cover the windows. Now it's because the interiors actually had things like curtains and window screens, but it is a little silly that in being accurate to the environments that I'm representing, I am effectively covering them up so that they're harder to see from the outside. I own it and I regret nothing. If you're a crafter or a builder or any type of a creative person, I think we all hit points in projects where we go, I don't know if this is gonna work. And there's something magical about pushing through and just getting paint on the surface. And I felt that way here, where it was a little bit clunky, but as soon as we started color blocking out the clay and the planters and the sidewalk, it started to feel like maybe we were gonna be okay. So if you feel like that when you're making crafts, know you are not alone. If you, like me, are one of those people that thinks the greatest point in a maker video is the dry brushing, this one is for you. Even if you're building a fantastical environment, like an imaginary Japanese world inhabited by deer, I cannot stress enough the importance of having reference photos. Because for things like this, like how much branch scatter should be in the ground or what color should the clay actually be, having reference photos or real-world things that you can look back on is wildly helpful. So if there's one piece of advice I can give, it's do not underestimate the importance of reference photos. I'm gonna be honest with you nerds, I was really confident going into the snow on this one because I had just done snow on the last build. But this was my first time doing snow with a kitten. And that kitten is not sure about snow or the crafting process in general. If you're in the Shinjuku district of Tokyo, this is the door you should look for Bar Tokyo. And if you're in the Nara Deer Park, these are the deer you should be looking for to avoid because they're going to try to chase you down and eat your crackers. Final details, just throwing some polyurethane gloss on the ground and on the snow just so everything looks a little bit wet. And we're done. We did it! This was a first for us because we were working at such a tiny
tiny
train model scale.
I was super excited to get to do a lot of fine detail work.
That's what Alex is best at. This was my first time making trees.
From scratch.
From scratch. I watched a lot of YouTube videos. Thanks, internet. And then I took the things I liked most and came to our own, which involved a lot of gluing of actual tiny tree branches and then a lot of clumps and clumps and clumps of foliage, and then making them snowy.
Dani spent a lot of time trying to figure out how best to represent a gachapon machine because it's like a vending machine specifically for capsule toys. It was really inspired to use microbeads suspended in UV resin in cube shape, but it worked really well. And now we have tiny banks of gachapon.
I think my biggest learning from this one is we put so much care and attention into all of these tiny details just because they were things that were important to us from the trip, and you don't super see them. And even when it's lit up, you can't really tell they're there.
Devote the appropriate time to the scale that you're working in, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good one.
This may be the takeaway.
Yeah.
If you ever have the opportunity to go to Japan, it is an incredible place. We highly recommend it.
Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe if you're not already subscribed, and without further ado, let's roll the final footage.
You can store anything and anything with enough willpower. Uh-oh. Backpedal, Alex.
Oh, trees! Overrunning sound. They were invited. They're invited guests.
There's no humans there. It is just deer.
The humans are somewhere else.
The deer won.